Good evening. My name is Tiffany Neal, and tonight I will be giving a speech on a famous speech, and I will be evaluating it for you. Do you remember where you were at on April 4th, 1968? I don't. I wasn't born until 1984, but for some people, that day sticks out. Imagine you're the only white person in a crowd of riot-like African Americans that have been waiting for hours. You are the sole person that has to deliver the news that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. That's a pretty big responsibility. A famous poem was spoke by Aeschylus. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. That poem was quoted by none other than Robert F. Kennedy. He is the sole person that had to give the horrible news of MLK's death to a crowd of thousands in Indianapolis, Indiana. His speech had to reach across boundaries to whites, to blacks, and to not make them fight and keep them, together and not segregated. Because back in the 1960s, it was at its highest, and he had to do it peacefully, non-violently, and with caring and compassion. Does that sound familiar? That's because that was Martin Luther King Jr.'s main goal. He wanted peace and nonviolence throughout everywhere, no matter if you were polka-dotted or if you were an elephant flying around. Everyone deserved to have rights and for them to be equal. His speech was successful because he hadn't even wrote the speech. He winged it. I mean, can you imagine winging a speech of that magnitude? He never once looked down at his paper. I mean, the grace of him is unimaginable. And having to keep everyone not so much happy, but calm. And I could have never done that. He stayed unbiased through the whole speech, integrating Martin Luther King's techniques and his key points that brought everyone together. The bad part was that Martin Luther King was shot and killed by a white person, and Robert Kennedy, during his speech, tried to relate to these people he was speaking to by stating that his own brother was shot by a white person. So relating to them, helped the playing field. I mean, a hostile environment, and he had to pour his heart out to these people and speak the truth, and that is exactly what he did. He, tried to keep the tension down through the speech. He did a couple quotes by Martin Luther King himself, to reiterate the word that he spoke, effort to understand, compassion, and love for one another. He spoke of love to justice between fellow human beings and added that Martin Luther King died doing that. And you could feel in the speech that the audience turned at that point. And at the end of that speech, they applauded him because he kept it real and spoke of truth and kept the politics out of it and told them the facts. And that's what they wanted to hear. And that night, it was spoke by the National Public Radio that there were no riots in Indianapolis that night. There was riots all across our country, but not that night because of that 6-minute speech that he gave. How powerful can one person be? And 46 years later, we're still talking about it, and we're still impacted with it. And it empowered me tonight. I watched it with my sister, and tears are just coming down our face. I mean, the emotional level that you have to do in 6 minutes is just out of this world. I'm proud to be an American. It is very sad that Mr. Kennedy did die 68 days later after giving that speech. And the speech will forever live on. It will have effectiveness of power and emotion and to be able to turn something that was so dramatic into something peaceful and nonviolent. I know that Martin Luther King was looking down on Robert Kennedy that night and applauding him for that speech, and I applaud him on this day. I want to thank you for listening. I'm sorry it ran a bit long. I hope that we can look back in 100 years and say that that speech moved everybody to tears, because it's still relevant. Thank you, and have a great night.